So, staying on the naval theme for a while, you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours is a saying with its origins in the English Navy. These days we use it to suggest two people will do each other a favour or look out for each other so that both parties may benefit from one another's actions. During the 17th and 18th centuries, the Navy's punishment for disobedience or absenteeism were unimaginably harsh. It was common for a crew member to be tied to a mast after being sentenced to a dozen lashes with a cat of nine tails for even minor offences such as being drunk. A cat was 9 lengths of thin knotted rope bound at one end to a wooden handle. The flogging was usually carried out by one of the victim's shipmates in full view of the rest of the crew. But it was also likely that the shipmate would himself be a victim of the cat of nine tails at some stage during the voyage, so would be lenient with his victim by applying only light strokes and merely scratching the fellow's back. He himself would then receive equally lenient treatment by another shipmate if he was ever on the receiving end. The captain's log is an instrument for measuring the speed of a ship through water, sometimes known as the maritime log. The same name is also given to the daily record of events on board a ship, and in the case of an aircraft or a motor vehicle these days it's known as a logbook. And the reason for this is that in the early years of sailing, prior to the introduction of modern instruments and accurate timepieces, officers would literally drop a chip log, a quarter-circle flat piece of wood, into the sea from the bow of the ship. This was then attached to a rope with knots tied into it at measured distances. At the rear of the vessel, a crewman would be waiting with a sandglass, also known as a log glass, and in modern times it's known as an hourglass. As the knots passed by, the distances and times were recorded, and a rough calculation of the speed could be made. This information was then noted down on the log itself. And also, quite obviously, this is where the term knot comes from, meaning 1 nautical mile per hour. No wonder it took them so long to get anywhere in those days. To stick by somebody through thick and thin, or as some people say like Posh and Becks, is to stand by a person or a venture and remain loyal through the good times and the bad. This was originally a nautical expression and refers to the system of thick and thin pulleys enabling ropes of varying width to be used for hoisting the sails up and down. Now, when somebody is aloof, they're thought to be unapproachable and keeping others at an emotional distance. Now, this expression originates in the mid-16th century and comes from the Dutch word loof, meaning windward. Throughout the Navy, the loof became the word meaning to be away and windward, which would indicate a ship was sailing at a long lee shore, setting her bows close to the wind and away from the land to prevent herself from being blown ashore. From the land, this would look like the ship had her back to you, metaphorically speaking, with her head held high. Technically speaking, the ship was known to have been aloof. A slush fund is a sum of money usually collected with little effort or money from an investment or funding scheme that has not been designated for any other. It would then be spent in a cooperative way for the benefit of the many. These days it's often used as a political term on both sides of the Atlantic. The original slush fund was found in the galley kitchens beneath the decks of all the tall ships of the 17th and 18th centuries. Now, during those pre-refrigerated days, meat would be preserved for many months by being salted and stored in large wooden barrels. Towards the end of the voyage, the empty barrels would then be boiled and scraped, hence the term scraping the barrel, a phrase we use to describe accepting any circumstances available to us when we've run out of a better option. All the salt, including the fat drawn from the meat, would then provide a slush which would be sold ashore by the purser. The money raised would be collected into a fund which was then used to buy luxuries for the whole crew, such as luxuries were in those days. This practice was later extended to damaged cargo and war equipment, and the term slush fund was firmly established by 1839. As usual, it didn't take long for the politicians to hijack a naval phrase, and a slush fund soon became known as an illegal fund of money that had been established to pay people off with. Going into even more detail, the word slush derives from the Swedish word slask, meaning wet and filthy. The old French word for cargo is a rummage, hence the selling off of anything damaged, unwanted or left over from a voyage quickly became known as a rummage sale. Staying on the water, as the crow flies is a term we regularly use when defining the shortest distance between 2 points. When the tall ships first left England in search of the New World without any reliable maps, they always made sure they had cages full of crows on board. A crow, the Navy believed, would always fly straight for the nearest point of land once it had been released from the top of a mast, and that is why there's a crow's nest up there. The captain would then alter the ship's course in the direction of the crow's flight. This practice continued right up until the introduction of radar in the 1940s. Crows were particularly useful in British coastal waters during either foggy or stormy weather in helping a crew to find the nearest point of land. If you don't like the cut of somebody's jib, then you generally dislike the way they look or what you've heard about them. In naval terms, a condition of something is known as the cut, whilst the jib is the foresail that is responsible for the general performance of the ship. Hence, the cut of its jib refers to the overall condition of a sailing ship. If a situation is touch and go, then that can be a very close thing. This phrase can be traced to the days of the horse-drawn carriage, where there were no rules of etiquette and certainly no highway codes. Accidents, collisions and near misses were a common occurrence. In the case of a full-blown collision, matters could become very complicated as there was no insurance system in those days, or very few laws for that matter. Added to that, there were few witnesses in the sparsely populated countryside in those days, and rarely there was any way to resolve matters fairly. However, in the case of an accident that was fairly minor, it was usually regarded as touch and go, meaning carriages had been barely touched and the damage was minor. The occupants of each carriage could go on their way without repercussion. A second theory suggests it's a nautical expression referring to when a ship's keel touches the seabed in the shallow water, but the vessel is not completely grounded and hence left high and dry. Instead, if the ship is able to move off again, the situation was known as touch and go, touching the bottom and leaving. The phrase "to be left high and dry" is used to describe being stranded in a situation without support or resource, and has been used regularly since the 1800s, dating in fact back to around the time of the Battle of Trafalgar in 1805. At that time the phrase was used to indicate a ship had been left grounded, possibly it had been touch and go for a while, but now it was vulnerable to attack as the tide went out. The captain of that ship had been left high and dry and could do nothing to resolve the situation until the tide turned, and then he could refloat his boat. And finally, for this episode, let's have a look at the phrase "to be caught between the devil and the deep blue sea," and that's no place to be, as there's no easy way out of there. On board the traditional wooden ships, sailors would regularly have to seal the seams between the planks with hot tar to prevent them from leaking. The devil seam was the highest one adjacent to the waterways or gutters closest to the side of the ship. This was the longest seam on the boat and most prone to leaking, so inevitably needed the most attention. Now, in heavy seas or during battle, a sailor may slip or be knocked into the seam and find himself trapped halfway down the side of the ship between the devil seam and the deep blue sea, and that was no place to find yourself. Thanks for listening, and I hope you tune back in for the next instalment. This has been Albert Jack reading wonderful words and phrases with nautical origins from the books Red Herrings and White Elephants and Shaggy Dogs and Black Sheep.